The war was over. At least, that's what the Zenthari believed. The coalition of sentient species had once been a force to be reckoned with, a grand alliance of civilizations spanning hundreds of star systems. They had stood united against threats before, repelling marauding warlords, diffusing intergalactic crises, and even surviving the plague wars of the Kithal. But the Zenthari were different. Unlike past enemies, the Zenthari did not come for conquest. They did not seek to rule, negotiate, or integrate. They came to exterminate. When their invasion began, it wasn't with demands or declarations of war. It was sudden, brutal, and absolute. Their fleets burned entire planets in coordinated strikes, glassing worlds from orbit before any resistance could even begin. Their ground forces were an abomination of biomechanical warforms, living nightmares that tore through defenses with ease, reducing entire cities to rubble in a matter of hours. Billions perished in the first wave. Trillions more followed. For every coalition fleet that scrambled to meet the enemy, 5 more were destroyed before they could fire a single shot. For every stronghold fortified, a dozen were reduced to craters before their defenses could be activated. The Zenthari were not simply winning. They were making a statement. The coalition had fought for survival before. This time, they were fighting against the inevitable. The fall of Helios Prime. The first real sign that the war was lost came with the fall of Helios Prime, the most heavily fortified military bastion in the coalition. It was a world that had never known defeat, with planetary shields capable of withstanding supernova-level attacks and defenses built into its very crust. The Zenthari obliterated it in 6 hours. The battle, if it could even be called that, began with a planetary blackout. No communications, no response, nothing. Coalition command scrambled to understand what had happened, assuming some kind of technological interference. Then, the surface reports came in. The planetary shields had not failed. They had been bypassed entirely. Zenthari forces had infiltrated the planet before the battle even began, walking unseen among the population, planting devastating biological weapons that liquefied organic matter in minutes. Entire cities collapsed into themselves, bodies dissolving into sickening pools of biomass. By the time the first defensive fleets arrived, they found nothing but silence. Helios Prime had been a world of over 20 billion souls. When the coalition ships made landfall, they found fewer than 3,000 survivors. And those that remained were wrong. Their eyes were blank. Their minds shattered. The only thing they could do was repeat the same words over and over again, their voices hollow and lifeless. They are inside. It was only later, when footage from the planet's security archives was recovered, that the true horror was revealed. The Zenthari had never launched a ground invasion. They had no need. They had walked in. Their forces moved undetected, unseen, their cloaking technology so advanced that the entire planetary security grid had failed to register them. By the time they revealed themselves, it was already over. The last transmission from Helios Prime was from its planetary governor, an aged Sorthian war veteran who had survived 100 battles before that day. His final words echoed across the coalition networks before the transmission cut to static. "We were never fighting a war. We were only waiting to die." Helios Prime was the first to fall. It was not the last. The collapse. After Helios Prime, the coalition's spirit broke. Worlds surrendered without firing a shot. Fleets defected, officers deserting in droves. Even those who tried to fight quickly learned the futility of their resistance. The Zenthari adapted to every strategy with terrifying efficiency. If a world relied on planetary shields, the Zenthari infiltrated them before the battle even began. If a fleet launched a preemptive strike, it would find itself walking into a perfectly laid trap. The most horrifying realization came when the coalition's top scientists analyzed Zenthari battle patterns. They weren't improvising. They weren't reacting to the war. They had already planned for everything. Every possible coalition tactic, every military contingency, every potential countermeasure, the Zenthari had accounted for it all before the war had even started. They knew exactly how the coalition would resist. They knew the weaknesses of every species, every army, every defense system. It was as if they had been studying them for centuries. And then, the worst discovery of all. The Zenthari had never lost a war. Not once. In the billions of years they had existed, their empire had never suffered a single defeat. Every species they had encountered, they had exterminated without exception. The coalition was not special. They were not unique. They were simply the next in line. The final plea. In the final days of the war, as the coalition's homeworlds fell one by one, the last remnants of its leadership gathered on a dying world known as Varric 4. Once a vibrant trade hub, Varric 4 was now a graveyard, its cities reduced to ruins, its people long gone. The only thing left was a battered war room filled with exhausted, desperate beings clinging to the last embers of hope. It was here that they made their final decision. A desperate message, sent into the void. A distress call, transmitted across every frequency, in every known language. The message was simple. To any species that can hear this, help us. We are dying. They did not expect an answer. Who could possibly stand against the Zenthari? Who would dare? For 3 days, the universe was silent. Then, on the 4th day, the response came. A single transmission. No video, no identifying markers. Just a simple text message, displayed on every coalition terminal at once. A message that sent shivers through every being that read it. We received your request. Stand by. The coalition leaders stared at it in disbelief. There was no official signature. No indication of what species had sent it. The message was direct, cold. Lacking in any of the usual formalities of diplomacy. It did not say we will help. It did not ask for terms or negotiations. It was a statement. A command. Stand by. And then, the coalition's sensors detected movement. Hundreds of ships, appearing at the edge of known space, moving toward the front lines at incomprehensible speeds. Their designs were unlike anything in the coalition archives. No grand insignias. No standard military formations. Their hulls were black, stripped of identification markings. As if they did not wish to be known. Or perhaps, as if they had already been forgotten. The Zenthari, for the first time in their empire's history, took notice. And somewhere, in the cold depths of space, a single human voice whispered in the dark. It's time. The first thing the coalition noticed about the human fleet was its silence. Unlike the grand armadas of the Zenthari or the disciplined battle formations of the coalition, the human ships moved like wraiths, dark and silent against the void. They transmitted no welcome messages, no strategic briefings, no diplomatic assurances. They simply arrived. The coalition, despite their desperation, hesitated. The Zenthari had crushed every military force they had encountered with cold, calculated efficiency. What hope did this unknown force have? But as the first human dropships descended upon the war-ravaged worlds, it became clear that these were not diplomats, nor were they soldiers in the traditional sense. The humans had not sent an army. They had sent something else entirely. The ghosts of Earth. The first human units to make planetfall did not come with fanfare or overwhelming numbers. There were no grand battle formations, no heavily armored legions marching in perfect unison. Instead, the first sign of their presence was the absence of sound. On the burning colony of Vortalis 9, where Zenthari warforms patrolled the ruins, the silence came first. One moment, the enemy moved with the cold efficiency of an occupying force. The next, entire patrols simply vanished, leaving behind only trails of blood. Zenthari command units scrambled to respond, deploying sensor drones and war beasts. But their instruments detected nothing. Their forces continued to vanish, one by one, with no signs of battle, no distress signals, no bodies left behind. And then, at exactly midnight on the planetary cycle, a single broadcast played on every frequency. A video feed. The image was dark, flickering. At first, it showed nothing but static. Then, a single Zenthari officer appeared, tied to a steel chair in the ruins of a command center. His mandibles twitched, his multiple eyes wide with terror. A voice, calm, human, spoke from the shadows. You think you're hunters? The Zenthari officer thrashed against his restraints, but something was wrong. His movements were sluggish, weak. His breathing shallow. His armored exoskeleton, normally impenetrable, was covered in deep gashes, his body riddled with wounds. You've never been hunted before. A knife glinted in the darkness. Then the feed cut. The Zenthari never received another transmission from that unit. The next morning, their warforms found the command center, empty. Every officer stationed there was missing. The only thing left behind was a single line, carved into the metal walls with something impossibly sharp. We are here. The Black Watch. The coalition's initial relief at humanity's arrival quickly turned to unease. It wasn't just the way they fought, it was the way they didn't. Traditional warfare required structure, organization, tactics. But the humans didn't seem to operate by any conventional military doctrine. There were no massed formations, no direct engagements, no prolonged sieges. Instead, the Zenthari war machine simply stopped functioning. Supply lines collapsed overnight. Zenthari generals were found dead in their own fortresses, their security forces oblivious to how their assassins had arrived. Warships drifted into Coalition space, their entire crews slaughtered, their weapons disabled. When the Coalition finally managed to communicate with the human forces, they discovered the truth. These were not regular soldiers. The force sent to combat the Zenthari was known as the Black Watch, an elite unit composed of the most dangerous individuals humanity had ever produced. War criminals, exiled commanders, experimental supersoldiers deemed too unstable for even Earth's deadliest wars. The Coalition had called for help. Humanity had sent its monsters. Terror as a weapon. What the Zenthari had never encountered before was fear. They had always been the superior force, the unstoppable conquerors, the nightmares that haunted the lesser species of the galaxy. Until now. The first reports of Zenthari forces retreating sent shockwaves through the Coalition. These were not tactical withdrawals. These were panicked retreats. Entire battalions abandoning key strongholds, dreadnoughts initiating blind hyperspace jumps without calculating their destinations. The Zenthari were running. One intercepted transmission, scrambled, barely understandable, revealed the growing paranoia infecting their ranks. They're inside the ships. I don't know how. We've sealed every corridor, but they're still here. We found bodies in the engine room. The door was locked from the inside. This isn't possible. I haven't slept in 4 cycles. I can hear them breathing in the vents. Even as the Coalition forces tried to coordinate with the humans, they found themselves increasingly disturbed by the methods of their new allies. It wasn't just that the Black Watch was winning. It was how they were winning. On the conquered world of Delsari 4, a major Zenthari stronghold, the human forces deployed an experimental chemical agent into the atmosphere. The gas did not kill immediately. Instead, it triggered a heightened state of paranoia and hallucinations in the Zenthari forces, breaking their minds before their bodies failed. When Coalition scouts arrived days later, they found an abandoned city filled with Zenthari corpses. No external wounds. No signs of battle. The invaders had turned on each other. There was only one human message left behind, painted in alien blood across the walls of the Zenthari command center. Do you feel it now? The turning point. Despite their overwhelming technological superiority, the Zenthari had no defense against psychological warfare. Their empire had never known fear, until the humans introduced them to it in its purest form. It wasn't just that they were being killed. It was how they were dying. No open battles. No grand engagements. Just disappearances. Whispers in the dark. Ships found adrift with no survivors, their crews seemingly having torn each other apart in panic. Entire legions that simply vanished, their last transmissions nothing but frantic breathing and barely comprehensible screams. The Zenthari were an empire of conquerors. Their history had been written in the blood of the species they had eradicated. But now, for the first time, they were being erased. And then, the unthinkable happened. A Zenthari warlord, a high-ranking general who had personally overseen the destruction of 5 Coalition homeworlds, broadcasted a message to the remnants of the Coalition government. A message that no one had ever expected to hear. We wish to negotiate. The transmission was cut short before the full message could be received. But the meaning was clear. The Zenthari were trying to surrender. The war had turned. But the humans were not done. For them, this was not about survival. This was about something far worse. This was justice. This was vengeance. This was extermination. The Zenthari had always believed themselves invincible. Their empire had stood for eons, an unstoppable force that had wiped out entire species without hesitation. Their war machine was flawless, their strategies perfected over countless conquests. And yet, for the first time in their long and bloody history, they were experiencing something entirely new. They were losing. Not to superior firepower. Not to overwhelming numbers. They were losing to something they didn't understand. The humans did not fight wars. They waged extermination. The disappearance of Korish fleet. The first undeniable sign of total collapse came with the disappearance of Korish fleet. Composed of over 50 warships, including 2 Dreadnought-class battleships, the fleet had been stationed near the Zenthari central supply lines. It was meant to act as both a defensive blockade and a staging ground for future planetary assaults. Then, in a single night, it went silent. No distress signals. No signs of battle. No wreckage. When a reconnaissance vessel was sent to investigate, they found the fleet adrift in deep space. The ships were fully intact, no external damage, no evidence of combat. But when the boarding teams entered, they discovered something horrifying. The ships were empty. Every single Zenthri crew member was gone. Not dead, just gone. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Weapons were still in their holsters. Food sat half-eaten on tables. It was as if every crew member had simply vanished. Only one clue was left behind. On the bridge of the flagship, the walls had been defaced with deep, jagged carvings, scratched into the metal as though by desperate claws. You are prey. The hive siege that never happened. On the Zenthri breeding world of Zalzur, panic was setting in. Zalzur was considered untouchable, a fortress world that bred new generations of Zenthri warriors by the billions. Protected by planetary shields and an armada of defense platforms, it had never once been threatened in the history of the Empire. And yet, the planet's security feeds began picking up strange anomalies. Shadows moving where there should be none. Unexplained power failures. Entire facilities going dark for hours at a time. The planetary governor ordered a full lockdown. Every entrance sealed. Every soldier armed and alert. But it didn't matter. Because when the sun rose on the next cycle, the entire world was dead. Not bombed. Not invaded. Dead. Every living Zenthri on the planet, over 20 billion, had been wiped out in a single night. The planetary shields were still active. The defense platforms were untouched. No ships had entered or exited the system. And yet, when the Zenthri command sent a probe to investigate, the only thing it found was a single transmission left on an open frequency. A human voice, distorted and inhuman. We don't need armies. We don't need fleets. We are inside your walls. And we will never leave. The beginning of the end. The Zenthri High Command was in chaos. Entire fleets were refusing to leave their dockyards, fearing that they would vanish like Korish fleet. Generals who had once relished in slaughter now cowered in fortified bunkers, paranoid that the next shadow they saw would be the last. Infighting broke out among the ruling caste. Some demanded an all-out counterattack, throwing every last resource at the humans in a desperate attempt to reclaim control. Others argued for retreat, believing that the only chance of survival was to flee beyond known space. The truth was, it no longer mattered. The humans had already won. Not through brute force, but through fear. The Zenthri's greatest strength had always been their ability to instill terror in their enemies. Their entire empire was built upon the idea that they were unstoppable. But now, the fear that had once been their weapon had turned against them. They were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. And the worst part? They didn't even know how they were dying. Every security measure failed. Every defense was bypassed. Every strategy fell apart the moment it was put into action. Because the humans weren't fighting a war. They were delivering a message. The Emperor's plea. The final breaking point came when the Zenthri Emperor himself, ruler of an empire that had never known defeat, sent a direct message to the remnants of the coalition. A plea for surrender. It was unprecedented. The Zenthri did not surrender. They had never needed to. And yet, there it was, a desperate transmission, begging for an end to the war. The coalition leaders, still recovering from the brink of annihilation, debated whether to accept. Many were hesitant, fearing that it was some kind of elaborate deception. Others argued that this was their only chance to ensure their survival. But before they could respond, the transmission was abruptly cut off. The Zenthri homeworld, once the unassailable heart of their empire, had gone dark. No communication. No activity. Nothing. And when the first coalition scouts arrived days later, they found the world abandoned. Not destroyed. Not conquered. Abandoned. Every city was empty. Every fortress deserted. The streets were littered with weapons, as if the Zenthri had simply dropped them and fled. And in the center of the imperial palace, carved into the walls in deep, jagged lines, was the final message left by the Black Watch. Run. The Zenthri had run. Their once mighty empire, which had stood for millions of years, had collapsed in weeks. Entire fleets abandoned their posts. Fortress worlds were left to rot. Their homeworld, once the pinnacle of power, was now a silent husk. But the humans were not finished. This was not about survival. Not anymore. This was a reckoning. And the Zenthri would learn that some nightmares never end. The hunt begins. The coalition watched in stunned silence as the remnants of the Zenthri Empire scattered across the galaxy. Fleets that had once burned planets now drifted aimlessly, their crews too terrified to engage. Zenthri warlords, once feared conquerors, now fought amongst themselves for control over the dying embers of their civilization. Yet the humans did not relent. They did not accept surrender. They did not negotiate. They only hunted. The fall of the dreadnoughts. The Zenthri still had weapons. they still had warships. In raw firepower, they remained one of the most advanced species in the galaxy. But it no longer mattered. The first demonstration came when the Oblivion Spear, the largest warship in the Zenthri fleet, was found drifting near the dead world of Ostara 5. It was intact. Its hull bore no battle damage. Its weapons were fully operational. Yet when the Coalition approached to investigate, they found the crew had been slaughtered. Not by an enemy fleet. Not by boarders. The crew had killed themselves. Recordings found in the ship's black box revealed what had happened in the final hours. They're inside. We sealed every bulkhead, every door, but they keep getting through. How? We destroyed the escape pods. No one is leaving. No one can leave. We cannot let them spread. I saw one. A human. It wasn't wearing armor. It wasn't holding a weapon. It just stared at me. I shot it. I swear I shot it. But it didn't fall. I hear them whispering. If anyone finds this, please, please don't come looking for us. The last recorded words were from the ship's commander. I don't want to die like this. I refuse. The sound of a plasma pistol firing ended the transmission. The entire Zenthri fleet received the message. Morale shattered. And the real slaughter began. Hunted across the stars. Nowhere was safe. The Zenthri tried to hide in the uncharted regions of space, in black holes and nebulae, in abandoned worlds far from known hyperspace lanes. It did not matter. The Black Watch found them anyway. It was not a war. Not anymore. It was an extermination. The Zenthri who surrendered were given no mercy. Those who fled were allowed to run, only to be found days later, their ships gutted, their crews missing. And for the first time in galactic history, other species joined in the hunt. The Galactic Coalition, once on the brink of extinction, had now turned from the hunted to the hunter. The fractured remnants of their fleets followed in the humans' wake, targeting any surviving Zenthri, making sure none escaped. What had once been a desperate war for survival had become something far worse. A purge. The message was clear. There would be no prisoners. No diplomacy. No peace. Not after what the Zenthri had done. Not after the worlds they had burned. Not after the billions they had slaughtered. The final bastion. Deep within the dying empire, the last remaining Zenthri warlord, Zorvakul, had gathered what little remained of his species. From the last stronghold of Caraxes Prime, he broadcast a final message to the galaxy. We surrender. This war is over. We ask for mercy. We ask for terms. We will abandon our weapons. We will submit to your rule. Just, let us live. For 3 days, there was no answer. Then, on the 4th day, Caraxes Prime's planetary shields flickered. Not from orbital bombardment. Not from a full-scale invasion. But from something far worse. The humans had already landed. Without a sound. Without warning. They were already inside. The last transmission from Caraxes Prime was intercepted by the Coalition. A desperate voice. They are here. Gunfire. Screams. We let them in. We opened the gates. And they just walked inside. They aren't soldiers. They aren't even men. They are something else. Mercy. We asked for mercy. Static. Silence. And then, a single human voice. Calm. Unshaken. No. The transmission ended. Caraxes Prime burned. The last of the Zenthri died. Their empire was no more. The aftermath. The war was over. And yet, as the Coalition stood among the ruins of their former enemy, they felt no joy. No triumph. Only a cold, lingering fear. Because they had seen what the humans were capable of. They had called for help. And help had arrived. But at what cost? The Black Watch did not return to Earth. They did not stay to celebrate. They simply vanished. Their ships disappeared into the void. No goodbyes. No explanations. As if they had never been there at all. And in the years that followed, as the Coalition rebuilt and the galaxy moved on, one final truth remained. A whispered warning, passed from one species to the next. A warning that would last until the end of time. Never threaten humanity. Because if you do, they will never stop hunting you. The war was over. The Zenthri were gone, every last trace of their empire erased from the galaxy. Their fleets? Destroyed. Their colonies? Burned. Their homeworld? A graveyard. Humanity had come, and in their wake, there was only silence. The Galactic Coalition tried to move on. The survivors rebuilt. Treaties were signed, alliances reforged. But beneath the surface, a cold truth festered. The Zenthri had been exterminated. And the ones who had done it had disappeared. The Black Watch had left no trace. No homeworld, no command structure, no signs of recruitment. It was as if they had never existed. But the galaxy knew better. Because sometimes, in the dark corners of space, a ship would go missing. A warlord's outpost would fall silent. An empire would rise in arrogance, only to collapse in terror overnight. And when the survivors were found, their corpses frozen in screams, the same warning would always be carved into the walls. We never left. The Ghost Fleet. Decades passed. The war became history, then legend, then a cautionary tale whispered in hushed voices. The coalition had grown powerful in the absence of the Zenthri, but fear of the Black Watch never faded. And then, the sightings began. First, they were dismissed as rumors, ghost stories told by captains who had spent too long in the void. Unmarked ships drifting in deep space, their hulls black as night. No transponders. No signals. Just, watching. Then, entire fleets began disappearing. Not in battle, not to war, but vanishing. No distress calls. No wreckage. No survivors. The only evidence that they had ever existed at all were the final, panicked transmissions. They're inside. No escape. No escape. No escape. And then silence. Every trace of them erased. Every record wiped. Every memory forgotten. It was as if they had never existed. The warning. It was on the 50-year anniversary of the Zenthri's fall that the Coalition received a message. No transmission logs showed where it had come from. No ship appeared on their sensors. It simply arrived. A single line of text. There must always be balance. No one understood. Not at first. But then, the disappearances became more frequent. It wasn't just the remnants of the old warlords or pirate fleets that were vanishing. It was coalition ships. Coalition colonies. Coalition leaders. Entire planets, gone. The galaxy trembled, desperate for answers. But there were none. There was only one name whispered in terror, spoken only in the darkest corners of space. The Black Watch. The monsters who had saved them. The ghosts who had never left. And then, one day, a final transmission was intercepted. From a hidden coalition station, deep in the void. A terrified officer, his voice shaking, whispering into the comms. We thought they were a myth. We thought they were our saviors. But they were never here to protect us. A pause. A shuddering breath. They were just waiting. And then, static. The station was never seen again. The Black Watch had returned. And this time, they weren't here to save anyone.